Hello, Professor and class. This is Giovanni. In Chapter 6 of our textbook, we are introduced to externalities. An externality occurs when the actions of a firm or individual impose costs or benefits on others who are not directly connected to the activity. For example, car emissions. Driving a car gives an individual private benefits. For example, driving to work, school, the store, etc. However, it has a negative externality in the form of air pollution, climate change, and environmental damage that the public at large takes. This is also known as the spillover effect. One way that our government has tried to negate this is through the concept of market-based solutions, found on page 139. A market-based solution forces markets to correct some of the environmental damages their industry creates through fines and taxes. In my opinion, I believe that the general public is not aware of market-based solutions for externalities. I believe that most people believe that taxes are related to national spending and debt and not used to limit some of the environmental damages caused by certain industries. For example, in order to negate some of the damages that car emissions produce, California imposed a gas tax with the hope of discouraging unnecessary travel, which may lead to higher emissions. In Chapter 7, we are introduced to the topic of efficiency and equity. Efficiency is determined by adding up everyone in society's wins and losses and then seeing if society overall is better off. Equity is seeing if those wins and losses are fair. An important question to ask is, did the rich get richer and the poor get poorer? On page 175, our textbook talks about measuring benefits and introduces the concept of willingness to pay, which means how much is an individual willing to pay in one situation rather than another. I believe that most people are aware of this concept, since this comes up every election cycle with new proposed taxes and measures. For a great example, in 2017, Los Angeles County had about 55,048 homeless individuals. Hundreds of tents filled the streets of Los Angeles, and LA residents wanted a change. In March of that year, the residents of LA County voted for an increase in sales tax of 0.25%, a quarter cent per dollar, to fund homeless services and prevention for the next 10 years. This was Measure H, which was approved by 69% of voters. This is a prime example of willingness to pay because it was voluntary in the sense that citizens collectively chose through voting and they were willing to bear an additional tax in order to support a public good. In Chapter 8, we are introduced to the study of public production of goods and services. At the start of the chapter, the concept of a natural monopoly is introduced. A natural monopoly occurs when one firm can provide a good or service at a much lower rate than if there were many competing firms. On page 209, the bullet points of natural monopoly is given to us inside a box. I don't believe that the general public understands or even knows this concept. More often than not, I hear people speak of monopoly in general, like Walmart and Amazon, and not natural monopolies, like the example I'm about to give. I believe the misconception or misunderstanding is in the word monopoly itself. A great example of a natural monopoly is Southern California Edison. Southern California Edison has the exclusive rights to produce electricity to most of Southern and Central California. This means that customers cannot choose another electric company for electricity services. Now, the reason for this is that Southern California Edison has already established a power grid, which includes power plants, transmission lines, and substations, just to name a few things. If another company will want to compete, the cost to build such a power grid will be astronomical, and the financial return will be unlikely. Since having a grid, adding another house or business will be relatively cheap for Southern California. Lastly, duplication of services from another competitor will be inefficient since they will have to build a separate grid, as mentioned earlier, which includes power lines, in the same neighborhood, which honestly would be a waste of resources. On the fourth video, at the 2 minute and 5 second mark, the presenter starts speaking about looking at debt as a percentage of GDP. This is known as a debt to GDP ratio. This concept measures the size of a country's debt and compares it to the total value of goods and services, also known as GDP, that is produced in a year. If the GDP increases every year, then our nation's borrowing power will increase as well, since we can demonstrate that we can pay off our debts. I believe that the average American doesn't understand this concept. They may have heard about it in the passing via a news outlet, but they don't know what GDP is and how it is tied to our national debt. This is based on my conversations with many people and listening to others debate government spending and borrowing online. The misconception is that people might not understand that the GDP is the goods that the citizens create, not necessarily the government. If we can make more goods and services, we can borrow more to cover our deficit. So the problem is not that we borrow, but that we can repay it. An example would be buying a car. Let's say you make $4,000 a month take home, and you take a car loan for $40,000. The loan equals about 10 months of your income, which will be like saying your debt is 80% of your yearly GDP. You might not be trustworthy to lend money to. So your income, your GDP, needs to increase. In video 5, at the 2 minute and 15 second mark, the concept of expansionary and contractionary monetary policy is introduced. The federal bank cannot tell commercial banks what interest rates to charge. So when they want to lower the interest rates and speed up the economy, they will print more dollars, increasing the money supply, forcing banks to lower their rates, since the consumer, us, have more options as far as who to borrow from. This is expansionary monetary policy. However, the opposite is true. If they want to slow down the economy and raise interest rates, they will do less circulation of money, meaning that less dollars will be available for the public to spend, which will cause interest rates to go up. This is called contractionary monetary policy. I believe that the average American understands this concept, since most people have some kind of debt with different interest rates from different times. They might not know the actual terms though, but nonetheless, they understand the concept. A great example of expansionary are payday loans. A lender can let you borrow money before your payday at a specific rate, allowing you to spend it sooner, boosting not just your spending power, but the economy in general. But for contractionary, a good example would be your credit card company lowering your limit and increasing your rates at the same time. Now you will have to borrow less and cut back on spending. In video 6, the concept of the gold standard is introduced and briefly discussed at the 4 minute and 2 second mark. The gold standard is a monetary system where the value of a nation's currency is directly tied to the amount of gold it has. This was once true in the United States until 1971, when the government declared that money has value because they say it does, not because of how much gold the country has. The majority of Americans understand and even know this concept. Over the past few decades, the cry to return to the gold standard has been prevalent. Now, a great example of this may be seeing what happened to the world after World War II, when many nations' currencies were connected to the US, which at that time was backed by gold. For a brief moment in history, this produced a global gold standard. Lastly, I want to show how some of these concepts work together hand in hand. Let's say that the federal bank decides to stimulate the economy by printing out more dollars for a stimulus package. This is known as expansionary monetary policy. Remember? With the influx of currency, Individuals might spend more, causing manufacturers to produce more items, causing more purchases, so on and so forth. This increases our GDP, which allows for more borrowing and spending. Now, this was just a quick example of how these concepts work together. With that said, this brings an end to my presentation. I want to thank you all and have a blessed week. Bye.